Right. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time to join me today for this presentation on having positive visits. And today we're going to just talk about and share some tips and ideas for having positive visits with the person in your life who's living with dementia. My name is Chris Van Leuven, and I'm an education coordinator with the Alzheimer's Society of Peterborough, Kawartha Lakes, Northumberland, and Haliburton. And I recognize that, throughout our discussion today, you might have a number of different questions that come up. Because I am recording today's session and I'm trying to mask everybody's faces, I'm not able to see you while I'm sharing my PowerPoint. But if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. And we will stop the recording and stop sharing at the end of today's presentation so that we can have some Q&A time at the end of this session. So family, friends, neighbors, and extended family, they're all important sources of support for both the family and the person living with dementia. But sometimes there's some uncertainty that can come up when we think about what to expect when we're visiting somebody. So today we're going to talk about just some helpful suggestions for visitors. The Alzheimer's Society of Peterborough, Kawartha Lakes, Northumberland, and Haliburton respectfully recognizes that our organization is located on the treaty and ancestral territory of the Michi-Saagiig Anishinaabe people, who are known as peacemakers among Indigenous nations. We're grateful to the original stewards of this land. It's our goal for this land acknowledgement to be an active, living statement of intent which will build a bridge toward greater understanding and inclusion. This is the start of a conversation, and we intend to listen and learn. So when it comes to having positive visits, communication really is the key. But we know that for many people who live with dementia, that their communication skills are often affected. So as visitors, it's really helpful for us to understand the communication changes that can occur in dementia. And it's helpful for us to learn some different strategies for supporting the person to be able to continue to express themselves and participate in the dialogue. Communication is so vital for our lives, right? Because it allows us to express who we are, to relate to one another. Communication, it's more than just kind of talking and listening. It involves understanding what's being said and interpreting that message as well. Dementia affects how people express themselves and understand what's being communicated to them. And for the person living with dementia, because of these communication changes, it can affect their ability to maintain their relationships. And so there's just some following changes that I'll highlight here that tend to be common when we think about communication changes in dementia. So the first one is difficulty finding a word. It's like the word is on the tip of your tongue, but it's just not, you're not able to get it out, or you can't think of the word that you need to describe what it is you're trying to say. Another thing that can happen is that the person living with dementia will create new words for ones that have been forgotten. So it's almost like they're coming up with their own language, or sometimes they will describe that thing rather than use the actual word. And this can make it difficult for us to understand when we're on the other end. Another common change with communication is that the person may repeat the same question or the same word. This is called perseveration, and it's common, especially when we think about the changes in memory that can occur with dementia. So the person may not remember that they've already asked this question, or they may not recall that they were already given a response and what that response was. The person might have difficulty organizing their words into logical sentences. Sometimes we hear this called word salad. So the words are coming out, but it's in a way that doesn't really make sense. We might notice that the person living with dementia loses some of their filters. So they may use more colorful language, or they may swear when that used to be something that they didn't do before, or that wasn't common for them before. If English wasn't the first language that the person learned in childhood, they may revert back to that original language. And lastly here, we might notice just in general that the person talks less than what they used to. So they may seem more withdrawn or they're just not as actively participating in the dialogue or the conversation. When a person is experiencing these changes to their communication abilities, they might feel frustrated, frustrated that they can't express their needs or get their point across. They might feel discouraged if it seems like nobody can understand or make sense of what it is they're trying to say. And it's important that we really take a moment and recognize these challenges and try our best to continue to be supportive, to remain calm, to keep our patience about us, and also keep offering those words of encouragement because sometimes that can help. We're going to watch a video now which outlines some important tips and strategies to help enhance communication when you're visiting with someone living with dementia.
A person living with dementia may have trouble expressing themselves or understanding what's being communicated. Try these 5 tips to help you stay connected. Tip 1 is use what you know about the person. What does the person like? Use that knowledge to suggest conversation topics or activities they may enjoy. Nurture the person's skills and abilities. Focus on what they can do instead of what they can't. When the person's making a choice, offer them a couple of options that you know they will like. Tip 2 is reduce distractions. Take notice of what's around you. This is a simple thing to do, but it can make a big difference. Identify possible distractions in the person's environment and try to minimize them. Account for any hearing or vision challenges the person may have. Make eye contact to help focus the person's attention. Tip 3 is chat face-to-face. When speaking with the person, be clear and concise. Avoid talking to the person if you're behind them or where they can't see you. Speak clearly using short and simple sentences. Show as well as talk. Using actions can help give your words meaning. The 4th tip is to be flexible, as it may not always go as planned. A person's abilities can change from day to day. So take a few moments at the beginning of the conversation to assess how they're doing. Look for changes in behavior and body language that may tell how the person's feeling, especially if they may indicate discomfort. Adjust to accommodate. When the person's unable to communicate verbally, communicate through the senses, like touch. Our 5th tip is to stay positive. Help make the person feel comfortable by modeling the mood. Be aware of your own tone and body language. Connect instead of correct. Ignore mistakes and give encouragement. When you feel overwhelmed, take a step back and exhale. Remember to take care of yourself too. It's not easy to be there for the person living with dementia, while also taking care of yourself at the same time. There will be days when these tips don't seem to help, but your presence is still felt by the person living with dementia, even when it may not be obvious. And it's important that you find a healthy balance and ask for help when you need it. Remember, you're not alone. For more tips and examples for meaningful conversations with people living with dementia, please.
All right, so in addition to those 5 communication tips that were outlined in the video, we have some other strategies as well to help enhance communication during visits. So the first one is to really set the tone for a good visit by checking your body language at the door. People who live with dementia, they may lose some of their verbal communication skills, but in general, they tend to be really good or really intuitive when it comes to picking up our vibe. So we want to make sure that we're leaving any negativity behind when we start our visit. Enter with positive energy, enter with a smile and a pleasant greeting. That can really just help to set the tone from the outset that this is going to be a positive visit. It's going to be a good day. Next, we want to approach from the front. We don't often think about this, but for someone living with dementia, they can often lose their peripheral vision and develop what we call tunnel vision. So they're really only able to see at times, kind of directly in front of them. So if we're talking to the person, we're off to the side or we're behind them a little bit, they may not know that we're talking to them, or we may startle them. So we want to make sure that we're approaching from the front in a calm way, that we're, making some genuine eye contact. And when we really kind of sit down to enjoy our visit or stand, making sure that we're on the same level. So if they're standing, we'll stand with them. If they're sitting, we'll sit with them, but within that line of sight. Next, we want to show that we have time for this visit and that we're not constantly checking our watch. We're not clock watching. Because when we do that, when we're looking at the time often, the person might interpret that as you not enjoying your visit or that you might have better places to be. And that could be hurtful, or it may kind of set them feeling kind of negatively, and it might change the tone that you're getting from them. It can be helpful for us to use verbal and nonverbal ways of making ourselves understood. So sometimes showing and talking, they mentioned this in the video as well, but it can be helpful. So if we're offering water, we might want to say like, oh, did you want a glass of water? Kind of using tools, whatever in the room is available to us to help kind of enhance our communication by combining that verbal ask with a visual. Similarly, we also want to pay attention to the person's nonverbal cues and nonverbal communication. So, looking at their actions as well as their words, looking at maybe what emotions they're displaying and validate as needed. Sometimes when we're visiting, we can feel a lot of pressure to keep the conversation going, but don't feel pressured to fill the silence because quiet time during a visit can be meaningful as well. So just recalling that, not all communication is verbal, and we can kind of show that we're present in the moment by using our nonverbal gestures and touch and other ways of connecting. If we're visiting, we're in a conversation and we notice that the person is really, kind of maybe stuck in a rut, they're dwelling on something that might be unpleasant, we can try and shift the direction of that conversation from that unpleasant topic to something more uh, palatable or nicer, especially if the person's becoming kind of agitated or upset. So, for example, if they're complaining kind of on and on about the meals where they're living, or something else that's happening in their environment, we might want to try and shift away so that we can change the tone and just make that visit a little bit more uplifting. Okay, so sometimes it can be difficult to think about how we might end our visit because we get worried that the person might be really upset when we go to leave. So, what we can do is try and think ahead so that we are making the end of our visit coincide with something like a meal or going to an activity that's happening for the person. And that can make the end of the visit kind of come more naturally or with greater ease. Next, as we're leaving, try and refrain from using the word goodbye. Instead, we can try things like see you again soon, or see you again next time, or just really highlighting, I really love this time that we spent together. This has been a really great visit. I really like catching up with you. And then use your see you later to make that visit come to a conclusion. One thing about communication is that those abilities can fluctuate. So the person might have really good days where they seem really able to keep up with the conversation, the dialogue, and then they may have days that are not quite so good, where they're not quite so clear or they're getting frustrated. These fluctuations happen for a variety of reasons. It could be maybe the person didn't get very much sleep. Maybe they have other health things going on. Maybe they're dealing with a cold. Maybe they're stressed. Maybe they have changed medications. On the days when these communication tips don't seem like they're working, you just kind of have to brush it off. Remember that the person still feels your presence. They know that you're there, and the emotion is still there. So they may not really remember the visit after you leave, but they'll remember the feelings that they felt during that visit. So now that we've kind of just a quick overview of communication, which is so important for visiting, let's talk about why visits themselves are so important. There's many benefits that people who live with dementia can experience from welcoming visitors. First, people by nature, we are social beings, and connecting with others is really an important part of our livelihood. We recently went through the COVID pandemic. It was a time when we were feeling quite isolated, and we noticed those negative impacts of that social isolation on ourselves, on our family members, and on those especially who live with dementia. Social isolation not only increases the risk of developing dementia, but it also can worsen the symptoms. So it's really important that we try and keep people living with dementia as active and engaged as possible. Visits themselves, they allow for some of that stimulation and activity. They help to keep our brains active. And that's really important when it comes to both the maintenance and improvement of our overall brain health. So, playing a game, working on a project together, these are brain stimulating activities. And they're also a really great way to work together and build that connection or keep that connection going. Planning regular scheduled visits for the person living with dementia can also help to support their emotional well-being. We notice that, people who receive regular visitors, it helps to alleviate those feelings of loneliness, feelings of isolation, but can contribute to the alleviation of feelings of fear, anxiety, and suspiciousness as well. And lastly, visits provide people living with dementia the opportunity to reminisce. So, reminiscing about the past, about their memories. People living with dementia, even though their short-term memory is affected, sometimes that long-term memory lasts much longer into the disease process. So, if you can find a way to help trigger some of those more distant memories or pleasant memories, the person might become more animated or interested in keeping that conversation going. And sharing and reminiscing helps to pass the time during our visit in both a fun and meaningful way. So these are some helpful tips to consider before we even start the visit that can help us, set that stage to make sure that the visit is going to go well. First, we want to think about the best time of day to visit the person. So what do we know about their daily schedule? What time do they normally wake up during the day? What time are their meals? Are there certain activities that they attend on a regular basis that they really wouldn't want to miss, like an exercise group? Finding a nice gap in their daily schedule to visit will give them something to look forward to. Next, we want to consider the best time of day to visit. So it might be kind of later in the morning or in the middle of the day before, they start to get tired. So when they're more fresh, it could be joining them for a meal if we know that they tend to be kind of more lonely at meal times. Um, or your visit, if timed correctly, it might be a really welcome distraction if the person is experiencing what we call late day restlessness. So, late day restlessness is the term that we use to describe what used to be referred to as sundowning. So, it's that period of the day later in the day where the person might really start to show signs of agitation or restlessness. So if we can kind of time our visit around that time, we might be able to alleviate some of that restless behavior just by being a distraction and by being there to support. Next, we want to think about the length of the visit because the length of the visit, what's appropriate for the person really varies. It's really, up to each individual. Remember that visits don't have to be super long or lengthy to still have a positive impact on the person. And if you visit regularly, you'll begin to get a feel yourself for, how long is appropriate. We don't want to push past the point where the person is starting to get fatigued or too tired to really continue the visit. We want to kind of find that sweet spot. You can consider asking other people that visit, what they've found works for this person. You can also talk to the care providers, depending on where the person's living, to see what works best for them. And visiting can also vary. Maybe they can cope well with a longer visit in the morning, but don't do well with longer visits in the afternoon. Mostly, as we come into these visits, Recognize that it's kind of a learning process. We're going to learn as we go as to what works for the person, but we want to be kind of open and flexible. What works really well one day might not work so well the next. Other considerations for setting the stage include things like preparing what it is you want to bring. So, if there's any activities that you want to bring with you to do during the visit, or items that you know that the person would like photos or books, think in advance about what might work. We also want to check for any events or things that are going on that maybe you can enjoy with the person. So, checking an activity calendar, checking what's going on in the community, look around to see kind of what might be available, whether or not there's, something happening outdoors um, or any kind of music, that kind of thing that you could attend together. When we go into a visit, and we really want to have that kind of meaningful one-on-one time, it's important for us to kind of look at what's happening in the environment and see if there's any way that we can eliminate distractions from that environment, like turning off background noise, maybe asking permission to turn off the TV or the radio, closing the blinds if there's a lot of activity happening outside the window, just to make the visit more peaceful, less confusing, and easier for the person to focus. If the person with dementia is somebody that wears glasses or uses hearing aids, check to make sure that they're wearing them so they can both hear and see you properly. Encourage the person that you're visiting as well to help make decisions about how they want to spend the time with you. So if there's, it's always important to ask the person, even if we think that they may not be able to answer. Always try and put it out there and say, like what kind of things would you like to do together? And then maybe you can make a bit of a schedule or a list of things that they would enjoy. A final tip here is to recognize that it's generally a good idea to limit choices a little bit. So if you're asking them if they'd like to do something, like maybe go for a walk, trying to kind of phrase that to limit the choices to just one or two things. Like, would you like to go for a walk or would you like to sit and have a chat? Or if that's too much choice, you can try asking questions that only require a yes or no answer. So, would you like to go for a walk? Okay. So here we have some different examples for initiating a conversation. For close family members, these particular conversation starters might not really be the best fit as they are a bit more impersonal. But for people that are visiting as friends, volunteers, or as members of the care team, they might be more applicable. So, as we know, memory loss is a common symptom when someone's living with dementia. And even if you have visited the person before, they might not remember who you are. So, here's some suggestions just for addressing the person. You might say, "Hi, Mary, it's me, Jane, and I came to visit you today. Is this a good time?" Or, "Hi, Bob, it's Jane. Is it okay if I stay and visit for a while?" If the person says, "I don't know you," you can try and say, "Oh, I'm glad to meet you. My name's Jane, and I heard you really like flowers. I brought some pictures of beautiful flowers to show you." Sometimes it can be hard to know how to get the conversation started or what to say, but it can be helpful to use what you know about the person right off the outset. So that might help put the person at ease. It might allow the person to feel more comfortable and the conversation to flow a little bit better. So once you've got the conversation started, you might want to think about some different ways to keep that conversation going. And one of the things you can do is plan out some topics beforehand to touch on, or some different questions to ask. Keep in mind that any questions that you ask should be broad, and they shouldn't require the person with dementia to come up with any specific details, as this can be kind of difficult for someone experiencing memory loss. And also bear in mind that sometimes it is helpful to use those close-ended questions rather than any open-ended questions. So close-ended questions are any questions that can be answered with a yes, no, maybe, I don't know, or I don't remember. So some examples are things like, "Would you like to have a visit with me today?" Are you enjoying your tea and cookies? Or I like hearing that story about your horse when you lived on the farm. Do you feel like telling me now? Some open-ended questions that might work are things like, how are you? Or how's your day going? Because these types of questions work well because the answers are almost ingrained in us as part of our social script. Almost like the way we can recall the lyrics to a song, we're able to remember the common or socially expected responses to questions like the above. Saying, how are you? Almost always elicits a response like, good, and you? Just like saying, how is your day going? Prompts a person to respond with, fine, thanks. These types of broad questions could help put the person at ease, and they could work as a starting point for a more deeper conversation. The person that you're visiting will feel encouraged to keep up the conversation if it's apparent that you are listening, responding, and engaged in that dialogue. So, how do you show somebody that you are listening or that you are deeply interested in what they're saying? There are some ways to indicate that you're listening that you can do verbally. Uh, excuse me, and some suggestions to continue that conversation. So, even just offering kind of words of encouragement like, oh, how interesting, or thanks for telling me that. Or you can kind of just show that you're listening by saying, oh, I see what you mean, or I didn't know that, or oh, is that so? The point is to take time to connect with the person, really let them share, even if the stories that they're telling don't align with maybe how you remember things or your own reality. Just roll with it. Sharing in the moment, being present, and actively listening are all ways to demonstrate that you care and that what the person has to say and their contributions to that conversation are valuable. Sometimes the person may ask for something that you're not exactly able to provide for them. And it's not always easy to say no, but here are some ideas for how you might respond. So you could say, oh, I wish I could, or that's an idea, but it isn't a good time, or, I think it might be too hot out today for that. Or, oh, did you notice that the weather's kind of crummy outside? How about we try for another time? Sometimes we're not able to provide exactly what the person is asking us for, but we can suggest an option that might be close enough. So, for example, if the person's asking to go outside, but we know that the weather isn't cooperating, you could suggest going to sit by a window and looking outside instead. So it shows that we're listening actively when, even if we have to say no, at least it shows that, I've heard what you've said, I've heard what you're asking for. I can't exactly provide that, but here is a suggestion that might be second best or might still be a good option around the same planes or along the same idea of what you were asking for. So now you might be come to the end of your visit. You want to wrap up this conversation. And it's helpful if you can think about how you might leave things on a positive note. This isn't always easy because ending the conversation might mean that a meaningful time that you've shared together has come to an end. And the person may have feelings of being lost, they might feel lonely. It can be helpful to remind the person how much you've enjoyed their company, remind them that you'll be back again soon. So here's some suggestions for how you might start to wrap up the conversation. You can say things like, I always feel good after visiting with you, or it's so much fun talking to you. You tell great stories. Or, seeing you is the best part of my day. You can also tell the person that you need to get going. So you could say, like, oh, I didn't realize the time. I need to get going. Or I need to get to the bank before it closes. I better go. Or I should head out. I have some errands to run and it's getting late. One tip here is to not use the word home when you are leaving. This could be upsetting for the person if they're in a long-term care residence and don't understand why you aren't taking them with you. You'll notice in the examples that are outlined on the screen, we've intentionally omitted the word home. Some care partners have shared with us that they find it easier on the person if they don't say that they're leaving. And instead, they employ what we call a therapeutic truth. For example, they might say to the person, "Oh, you know what? I forgot something in the car. I'll be right back." In general, the person who's living with dementia will move on to the next activity in their day, and they won't remember that they were expecting the care partner to come back. And this can make that end of the visit transition go a bit more smoothly. However, I recognize, that the use of therapeutic truths isn't within everybody's comfort zone. The key is to downplay your departure. Advice we've heard from staff at one of the local long-term care homes is to parachute in and evaporate out. So you want to make your arrival the big event and just try and slip away at the end of the visit without calling a lot of attention to yourself. Again, the timing of the visit matters because it's easier to end the visit if your leaving coincides with something in the person's schedule that doesn't actually involve you. That's the way we might evaporate out of that situation. They're moving on to their next activity, and we're quietly slipping out the door. Over the next few slides, we'll explore 3 more key strategies for fostering a positive interaction with the person living with dementia. So let's start with validation. For people living with dementia, it's possible that their perception of reality might become confused. However, it is their reality. So we want to try to accept their reality and meet them where they are. Avoid contradicting them or trying to convince them what they believe is untrue or inaccurate. You want to avoid trying to bring the person into your reality or arguing with them because that's likely to cause frustration and a breakdown in communication. If the person living with dementia says something that you know isn't true, you can find creative ways around that situation rather than reacting negatively. What we know about dementia is that it impacts the person's brain. So we want to always take it back to the brain. If they're saying things that we know aren't really accurate, don't really sound quite right, don't really coincide with how we remember events happening, chances are it's their brain working hard to fill in the gaps in their memory. So that's why the story might not come out quite as you recall. Validation therapy is a term coined by American social worker whose name was Naomi Feil. And it's an approach to understanding the reality of the person living with dementia in order to facilitate better communication and better support. It's one of the most important communication strategies we can use, particularly when the person living with dementia is feeling anxious, confused, or upset. Validation provides important feedback to the other person that you've understood their message and their feelings, and that you're making every attempt to understand exactly what it is that they're trying to communicate with you. So to validate, what we do is we respond to the person by stating the meaning and the feeling behind their message in your own words. Sometimes we refer to this as summarizing or paraphrasing their words, and it's almost like a check-in that you've understood correctly. Validation also means that you're stepping into the person's shoes and trying to determine what it is they're experiencing or how they're seeing the situation. So in other words, you meet them where they're at and you explore their sense of reality without making that attempt to bring them into your here and now reality. When we use validation as a communication strategy, we're able to enhance rapport, trust, and safety in that conversation. And we provide an opportunity for the person to feel successful. When you validate someone living with dementia, you accept them where they are and as they are without judgment. You have empathy for them and you try to create an awareness of their experience. You listen to them without adding your own reality. So we don't want to correct them or reason with them. You help them to express themselves by using cues that show your interest in understanding them, like nodding, making eye contact, mirroring their facial expression. You validate what's emotionally real for the person. You accept their experience and what they're feeling. So, what is generally happening is that the person, they might be misinterpreting or experiencing something in a way that really doesn't make sense for what's going on in the environment around them. We may not be able to look at the situation from the outside and fully understand what is happening for them. So that's when we need to kind of meet them where they're at. We might need to put on our detective hats to try and figure out how they're seeing that situation, where they might be in time and place, and what it is that's happening for them on an emotional level. So we often say, and you can see it on the screen, connect, don't correct. So the person, they've lost that ability perhaps to rationalize or reason as a result of dementia. So us trying to reason with them isn't really going to get either of us anywhere except for that feeling of frustration. So let's imagine for a second that you are visiting with the person living with dementia at their residence and they ask you to take them home. So imagining that, they are saying that they want to go home, even though that that they are home. So first, let's think about their reality. If the person doesn't recognize their surroundings or environment as their home, how might that feel? What emotions might they be experiencing in that situation? Next, we want to reassure the person. You could say something like, I understand you're feeling a bit homesick right now. I know what it's like to miss home too, and I'm here for you if you want to talk. This could lead to an opportunity to reminisce about the past or the person's childhood home. Lastly, use what you know about the person to redirect their attention. So you could, if you know that there's somebody that really likes to spend time outside, you could suggest going for a walk. You could redirect with an activity like a game or a puzzle, something that they enjoy doing. Or you could redirect by offering like a favorite treat or a cup of tea, and that might help to change the topic. As we know, the person's communication abilities might change a lot over the course of the disease process, but connection with the person is still possible at every stage. If the person can't communicate verbally, they likely will still be able to communicate in other ways and feel your affection and reassurance. And one way to accomplish this is to appeal to the person's senses. So when we think about the senses, that's our touch, smell, taste, hearing, and vision. So how do we communicate through touch? Well, we could try, simply just holding the person's hand. Other ways might be, brushing their hair, giving them a gentle massage on their hands, legs, or feet, or, getting a pet involved, a therapy pet maybe, to have them be able to have something soft to pet, or even just a soft fabric might be calming for that person. Connecting through smell, the person might enjoy the smell of a favorite perfume or essential oils. They might enjoy flowers or the smell of food that brings back some happy memories for them. We just have to be conscious of checking what the policy is around scents, depending on where the person is living. With vision, videos might be a relaxing way to support somebody living with dementia, especially ones that offer, nature sounds, or nature scenes, calm, soft music. Those might be ways to kind of connect through vision. When it comes to hearing, reading to the person might be comforting for them, even if they can't necessarily understand the words. Just the tone and the rhythm of your voice might be soothing. What you say is really not as important as how you say it. So, speaking gently, speaking with affection in your voice, your tone can help the person to feel relaxed. And you could also try reading something familiar to them, like a familiar story or a familiar poem, or depending on the person, scripture from the Bible might be comforting for them as well. Music is also a universal language that promotes meaning for so many of us. So you can play music, especially the type that would be meaningful for the person. So the type of music that they've enjoyed their whole life. Maybe they're a rock and roll person, maybe they're a country person, maybe they prefer some soothing classical music or jazz. And lastly, when we think about connecting through the senses, being outside is a sensory experience, but it can also help to alleviate feelings of anxiety and encourage healthy sleeping patterns by, really kind of regulating that circadian rhythm, getting outside when the sun is shining, getting that vitamin D. Laughing together. Laughter is really the best medicine, and it is contagious as well. Laughter can boost our mood. It releases endorphins, which are the happy hormone, and it helps us to relieve stress as well. Laughter is also a tool because it can help ease feelings of embarrassment that can come up, or any awkward moments that can arise. Consider telling jokes or watching funny videos of pets or children. Really just take pleasure in each moment. Sharing in the moment is very meaningful and beneficial. Even if the person doesn't remember it after, we can take comfort in knowing that they still enjoyed our visit. They shared our laughter in that moment. Bringing a child to a visit can also be fun. It can help maintain important relationships as well. So when we bring a child to visit with somebody living with dementia, we might want to, prepare that child for what they might notice or what they might see. So letting the child know what to expect, letting them know what dementia is. The Alzheimer's Society's website offers some different tips for discussing dementia with children to help build their understanding. And when you're sharing this information, be sure to listen to the child. Listen to any concerns that they have, any feelings that they have about this visit. You can always talk to the child, depending on their age, about communication tips as well. So telling them to speak clearly, letting them know that they can ask for help at any time. You can also bring along a quiet activity that the child and the person you're visiting could do together, like a puzzle or coloring books. You can have the child give the person you're visiting something that they've made, like a picture or maybe some cookies. Um, and at the end of the presentation today, I'll share a link to the section of our website that provides guidance for talking to children about dementia. So that could be helpful when you go to kind of prepare the child, again, depending on their age and what's age appropriate for that visit. So let's think a little bit about the different activities that you might decide to bring with you or do during that visit. You can try and engage the person living with dementia with reminiscing. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but reminiscing is so important. It taps into the person's long-term memory, which in the early stages of dementia tend to remain intact. And so they may be able to tell you more about what happened 20 years ago, 30 years ago. They might be able to tell you about their favorite teacher or the street that they grew up on, or anything from their past. Dementia doesn't impair a person's ability to feel emotions. So you can focus on the emotions rather than the specific exact details while you're reminiscing. What I mean by this is, maybe the person can't tell you exactly what dates or what year they got married, but they might be able to share how they felt on their wedding day. Activities that stimulate memory can also be meaningful. So this could be things like puzzles, it could be matching games to help with memory stimulation, or a really easy one that you can do with no materials at all are little fill in the blank games. So in this case, you start a phrase and the person living with dementia has to finish it. And again, our social script that we tend to have can help with this. So if I were to say, A stitch in time saves, I'm sure, each of your brains kind of jumped in there with nine. A stitch in time saves nine. Or if I were to start, all is fair in love and, I'm sure all of you thought all is fair in love and war. Another idea is engaging in everyday activities. So these activities are things that tap into the person's procedural memory. This includes things like meal preparation, cleaning, grooming, sorting things. When someone has dementia, other people tend to take over. They tend to do a lot or say a lot for that person. So allowing them the opportunity to do some of these everyday tasks can feel very empowering. You can also adapt activities so that people living with dementia can still participate. For example, maybe the person living with dementia was a carpenter and they may not be able to build a cabinet in the way that they once would, but they might still really enjoy sanding, sanding down on a piece of wood. Someone that used to love to cook, they might not be able to prepare a whole meal anymore, but you can break that down into steps because maybe they're still able to help knead the dough or chop some veggies. Other activities could be asking someone to help you fold towels, or you could take all the cutlery out of the dishwasher and ask them to help sort the spoons, knives, and forks into their proper compartment. These activities will provide the person with a sense of purpose and meaning, and they might just be more accepting of that activity or participating if there's a sense that they're either helping you or they're helping someone else. Something to note is that the activities don't have to have a purpose for you. For example, we heard a story once about a lady that really, she was living with dementia and she just liked to spend time going through old papers. And really, these papers didn't have any meaning to her family. But she would say to her son that she was preparing the documents for their taxes or for her taxes. And as she was doing it, not really fulfilling a purpose to the outside world, but for her, it made her feel productive and it helped her to feel useful, like she was doing something or accomplishing something. Here's an example of an activity that you might do with the person living with dementia or provide for them. You can either, create this to bring it on a visit, or you could work on it together. A memory box can hold just about anything, but in general, what we do is place items like trinkets, things from nature, pictures in this box that are meaningful to the person. The one here on the screen, the theme of it is around the different seasons, but you can have really whatever theme you like. If the person likes to collect newspaper clippings, maybe you could gather those into a box like this. If the person collected coins, maybe you could make a coin collection memory box and you could help them decorate the box to reflect themselves or their collection. One activity is to find the things together that you're going to put into this box, and then once you have the box created, you can take the things out and reminisce about them. Give me a moment. So when we're introducing a new activity, there are some tips that you might find helpful to encourage the person who's living with dementia to take part. Approaching every new activity with a calm and flexible attitude is important. First, it can be helpful if we break these tasks into steps to match the ability of the person living with dementia. So instead of saying, how about you go water the garden? That can be overwhelming. You could say, let's get the watering can from the tool shed. Let's fill up that watering can using the hose. Let's go to the flower bed and water the flowers, and really breaking it into a step-by-step process. It can also be helpful to demonstrate each step. So show the person how to do the activity, like start folding the laundry, and maybe they will step in and start taking part with you. Next is to help the person to start that activity. So one symptom of dementia is a loss of ability to initiate tasks. The person might still really want to participate in that activity, but they don't know how to begin. So we can help to cue the person by starting the activity, and then maybe it's possible that they will join in, and then they'll be able to continue on their own. So if you place the pieces of a puzzle out on a table for the individual, you could say, can you help me with the puzzle? And you start putting a few pieces together. And if puzzles are something that the person enjoys, chances are they will join in with you because you're modeling that task and helping to get it started. We also want to make sure that we are giving the person extra time to complete each step of that activity. So really just letting them go at their own speed. If we try and rush them through, they may get frustrated and not want to help anymore. So there's this example of one caregiver who asked her mom to peel potatoes for dinner. And it took mom, who was living with dementia, over an hour to peel just 5 of those potatoes. And initially, that caregiver felt upset because it kind of set off her plans for dinner and what time they were going to eat. But when she saw that her mom felt really happy and productive, the next time she just got her mom to start earlier. She gave her extra time to get those potatoes peeled. The lesson here was to let go of perfection and really just focus on the enjoyment of doing that task rather than the correctness or the timeliness of that final product. We want to be flexible and patient. So it's important for us to work with the changing needs. The approach of the caregiver is really critical for promoting a successful interaction. We want to make sure that the individual feels comfortable. And we also need to be prepared to change or stop the activity if the person doesn't really seem interested or in the mood to participate. In your planning of activities, keep in mind that they should be optimally failure-free. So in other words, the end product is not what we're focusing on here, but instead we want to focus more on the activity and the doing rather than that final product. Meaningful activities are not even always about the doing. Sometimes it's just about being present in that moment. Listening is a gift that we're able to offer to the person to help them feel valued, to help them feel that love. Sometimes the best quality visits are just about being present. So don't feel responsible to, as I say, don't feel pressured to keep that conversation going. It is okay to have quiet moments. It's also important to kind of schedule in some downtime to be able to relax and refresh as well. So we've covered now some communication, some different approaches to activities. We are coming to the end, but I didn't want to leave out the caregiver in visits. There are many emotions associated with being a caregiver and visiting the person living with dementia. Caregivers often have lots of different commitments and obligations, usually related to other family members and to work. And this can create stress for the caregiver because they feel like they're stretching themselves in or stretching themselves and their time. And it can allow or it can make it difficult for them to feel like they have enough time or enough energy in order to be able to have these visits. Every caregiving scenario is different. Some caregivers, they may need to leave work in order to have that visit. Others might be seniors taking care of seniors, and others might be part of what we call the sandwich generation. So here it's a member of the family that is raising a family or young children, and also being one of the primary caregivers for a parent or a relative. The caregiver might feel torn between all of these different competing obligations. They might feel like they always need to be there visiting um, whenever they have a spare moment in their schedule. They feel like that's the time they need to be there visiting. But then at the same time, they're kind of cutting themselves out of the equation. They're not able to get any personal time for themselves to recuperate and rebound. And all these different competing factors can lead to feelings of guilt and anxiety, worry, and disconnection. There's just a lot of emotions that can go on when we think about trying to plan our visits and balance time for ourselves and time for our other commitments. So here's how we might help with these things and these feelings. First, being realistic about what it is you're able to do. Knowing your limits is important. So take time to communicate these limits with other family members because maybe they're able to help. The load can be perhaps lightened on that primary care partner if we're able to create a visiting schedule or a check in schedule within the family. Second, try not to take it personally. So it can sometimes happen where the person living with dementia's perception are often different than our own. So they may say that we don't visit them, we never visit, or we don't visit enough, even though we know in our heart of hearts we're there often and we're putting in time and we are visiting daily, every other day, that kind of thing. Make sure that you are making and carving time for yourself in order to take care of yourself. Check in with yourself regularly to see how you're doing, what you might need, what your stress levels are like. Remember that the quality of the visit uh, is more important than the quantity of visits. So think about how we're going to make the time that we have together quality time during those visits you have planned. And lastly, here, this might be helpful, but thinking about other ways to show that you care and that you're there for the person outside of visiting. So there's other ways to connect without being physically present, like a phone call to say goodnight, or maybe when you are there for a visit, you take the time to give the staff a card for the person living with dementia that they can give at a later time, like a later time during the week when you're not there, just to show that you are still thinking of the person, you do still care, and it just helps alleviate maybe your need for the feeling of being there every hour of every day. So it takes energy and it takes understanding to be able to create um, meaningful activities for the person during your visits, and it can be challenging. So focus on the individual's strengths and interests, be creative and fun when you're making your plans for your visits. And if you need any assistance in thinking of what to do during visits, sometimes it's helpful to talk to other friends, other people that are supporting those living with dementia, and the Alzheimer's Society. We're here for you and we can help to brainstorm different ways to have meaningful engagement during your visits. It's your presence and it's your sense of caring that really matters at the heart of it. So we do have some different helpful resources available on our website. This link is to our Meaningful Visits brochure that has some different tips for activities you can do. And I will share the links to all of these resources at the end of the presentation here. The next one is the Challenging Your Brain website. It has a list of the different ways that we can help to keep the person living with dementia active and stimulated during visits. And lastly, here we have our Making Visits Meaningful website, and many of the strategies that we kind of outlined in today's presentation are covered here, but I'll share that at the end as well. For anyone that might be looking for more information about the services that are available at the Alzheimer's Society, this is Casey. She's our intake coordinator, And if you're not yet connected with us, or if you know of anyone that could benefit from our services, I would encourage you to encourage them to please reach out to Casey. She's the first point of contact at our Alzheimer's Society, and she can connect folks with the right person and resources to meet their needs. Okay, so we have come to the end here. So I'm going to stop our recording so I can see your faces again.